how much of our happiness is actually in our control. We often tell ourselves we'll feel better when life changes, when work slows down, and when our circumstances improve, when we achieve the next goal, or when everything finally feels alright. But what if the real transformation begins when we stop waiting for the outside world to change and learn how to become more present within ourselves? Our guest today is here to break all this down with us. Our guest today is Veronique Ory. Veronique, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here with you.
All right, so I would like you to introduce yourself to my audience.
Yes, thank you so much. I thank you for a warm welcome. I'm Veronique Ory, and I am originally from Montreal, Quebec, in Canada, and grew up with French and Hungarian in my home. My dad is originally from Hungary, and my earliest memories are of my grandfather telling stories in the living room, and he bought this Elvis Presley microphone and connected it to a double cassette tape deck and wanted me to sing and dance and give shows for the family. I have always been drawn to bringing people together and just seeing glee on people's faces, wanting to connect to that sense of uplift for ourselves and for one another. And my first career was in theater, feeling like that was the natural progression of doing shows in my grandparents' living room, was to find a stage or to be in a film or on TV. And I started my own nonprofit theater company in Los Angeles and ran that company in Los Angeles, California, and New York City for 17 years. And probably the last 5 or so years of the company, I had started practicing yoga. And I used to say in jest, but kind of serious, that I practice yoga for the safety of others. I was managing a lot of stress and anxiety. And probably like many, when we're operating at such a high pace and wanting to achieve and produce, sometimes when we're in stride, we don't fully recognize that we're managing so much stress until we're forced to stop or to slow down from, circumstances that are beyond our control. And that was definitely the case for me. And as I started to delve deeper into my yoga practice, I realized that this was the environment that I actually am guided to be in as a practitioner, certainly. And then because it had helped me so much move through what I was feeling was stressful and anxiety ridden, that I really wanted to bring that help and guide others through that, because it's, certainly such a pervasive energy in the human condition. So I started teaching, and from there have let go of my company and shifted away from theater, and am now guiding primarily one-on-one. I love the private attention of curating experiences for one person of what is it that you want. We curate a bespoke experience based on that. And then I also lead retreats, and I have a global membership called Shine, where people connect into community and practices in that spirit of shine, that sense of uplift for ourselves, and how that affects the collective, and how that can have a ripple effect on all that we do.
All right, so Veronique, take us to that first yoga class after Hurricane Sandy. What happened in that room that made you realize something inside you had changed?
Yeah. The hurricane that came through, it was one of those moments where it really made the entire city shut down. I think we've all had different experiences, no matter where we live in the world, where something happens and everything closes, and the things that seem urgent at the time, they are forced to stop. And I was producing many shows at the same time, and the subways closed, Broadway closed, everything closed for a couple days. And my roommate at the time had been going to a yoga studio in the same neighborhood, and he had heard that the studio had reopened, and did I want to go to class with him? And he pretty much could have said anything. I just was so wanting to leave the apartment. And so we went, and it was one of those life-changing experiences, because I had, tried yoga here and there over the years and didn't resonate with the teacher or didn't line up for some reason. And so I love sharing that part, for anyone who has, maybe tried yoga once or a couple times, or maybe, just seen something about it and it hasn't quite aligned. I really do believe that yoga is for everyone. And it's a matter of connecting with your receptivity in the moment combined with the teacher and the style. And that was definitely that moment for me where the teacher was so welcoming and the style really resonated. It was a vinyasa style class with restorative at the end. And I went to the front desk afterwards and asked for a monthly unlimited pass and said that I was going to be there the rest of my days. And yeah, that that's how I really connected into the physical yoga practice, and then also over time that has really been a spiritual practice, a practice that is definitely a yoga beyond the yoga practice on the mat as well.
All right. So before yoga, you describe yourself as being caught in the hustle and dependent on what was happening outside your control. What did you eventually realize about the way you were living?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that actually is learned behavior, that it would be interesting to look at child development and the ways that we can foster a holistically helpful new generation. Because I think a lot of times, from as early as I can remember, and then even when I was a nanny, or like when I've been with kids, there's these moments where we do something as a child and we get applause, like either from our caretakers or from our teachers, and we start to look for that as a marker that we're being validated, that we're doing well. And to different degrees, when we become adults, that's what we seek. And so if we're always in that learned behavior of seeking our validation from outside of ourselves and looking for different metrics of success, then we're kind of caught in that cycle of seeking from outside. And so what ends up happening is we are giving our power away in a lot of ways, which isn't to say that, outside validation is necessarily wrong. It's nice to hear you're doing a great job, or you're beautiful, or you're strong, right? We crave this. However, what we hope to cultivate is a sense of contentment that isn't contingent on someone saying something or getting that exterior validation. So what is really important in recognizing this is that then we can start to cultivate that sense of contentment from within through these different modalities that we have access to. And so one of the ways that I was really recognizing this when I was in New York was, and also in my years in LA, I would say, would be, well, first of all, if if anyone listening is an artist, this very intimately. It's like you put your heart out and you pursue something so fully, and then a lot of the acceptance or booking a gig, it's all very subjective. And so we encounter just an obscene amount of failure, rejection. I mean, they can say like there's no such thing as failure if you're learning something. And also, if you don't book the gig, there is a feeling of rejection. We can metabolize it, we can alchemize it in a way that we can learn from it and continue on. And that's what a lot of people do. I mean, I have friends that have been in the industry for decades and decades and decades. And so, at a certain point, you find a way to move through it where you're not, in such highs and lows. But oftentimes, artists tend to be a more sensitive lot of people, pretty empathetic. And certainly if you're an actor where you're adept at playing different parts and in tune to all these different emotions, it's very common to ride these really high highs and really low lows. And so that was really something that I was witnessing for myself over the years was of, I'd be so high, if I booked a part, and then if I didn't receive a grant from my theater company, then I would just be so defeated and feel like, oh my gosh, it's so hard to dedicate so much time and energy into something and not see it have the result that you would wish. And so yeah, it felt like almost schizophrenic in a certain way, just being like so gleeful and then bawling my eyes out on the kitchen floor, just feeling like the world was over. And you like really feel it that way. It's really challenging not to take these things to heart. And so, one of the things that we can do is we can certainly befriend just the nature of the industry. And then, for me, I think ultimately it was like, all right, the seed of what I'm desiring, it's needing to shift form. Because ultimately, what I was feeling like pursuing the arts was that I was just barely surviving, financially, it was so hard. And emotionally, it was so hard. And those things in combination can really mess with your psyche. And so ultimately, there was this reckoning of like, okay, I'm ready to shift this. There's definitely an old matrix that I was in of feeling pride around starving, like pride around that life is hard. And I feel like that's one of my big things that I love to talk about is actually shifting away from that. Because if we all can be in the celebration of thriving and whatever that means to each of us, then that also has the power to have that ripple effect to extend to the lives that we touch.
Okay, so your book is called Shine On and Off the Mat. What does shining actually mean to you?
Yeah. So shine, as you can probably gather from this conversation, it's connecting to our own light. So when we have parts of us that are illuminated, so if we're tapped into our creativity, if we're feeling inspired, if we're feeling excited, if we're around people that light us up, meaning, we connect to the people that have a joyful spirit, the people that make us laugh, or even like the people who make us contemplative, and then connecting to the place that feels like it's light energy. So you could think of it as vibrancy, you could think of it as radiance, you could think of it as kind of like your higher self, like a high vibration connected to spirit. So, some people might feel this way with their chosen family, your favorite people. Some people might feel this way when they're creating art. Some people might feel this way when they're in service. Maybe it's volunteering for a cause that you really believe in. When you're connected to your heart, when you feel like you're, being celebrated and supported in some way. So that's like really the mission, right? Is that we find the things, the people, the places that light up our souls, and we pursue that with all that we have, and then we encourage those around us to do the same, in their own ways.
Okay, thank you so much, Veronique. So, moving on, what would you say to someone who feels like they have to keep pushing because stopping feels unsafe or unproductive?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's great merit in pushing, just in general, like in terms of connecting into a fire element of, if that's a driving kind of energy, or a productive kind of energy. None of it is inherently bad. But if it feels like it's depleting, if it feels like you're exhausted all the time, if it feels like it's not regenerative, meaning your output feels dramatically more than what you're getting back, that's when to really take a look at, okay, there's probably a tipping point, a point where burnout's going to show up, or you feel like you're not able to go on in this way. Oftentimes, when people are pushing, usually that'll result in getting sick, or maybe a disease shows up. Usually the body is very intelligent in stopping us from continuing on. So, maybe it's that combination of pushing so much that then the sleep is compromised, and then the sleep is compromised. So then your choices are being made through a space that's not very clear. So, that can lead to substance abuse, or maybe, different kind of addictive behaviors, or not nourishing yourself in the foods that you eat, different things like that. It can definitely have a spiraling effect where when we're feeling depleted, we can't really make the choices that are connected to our highest, brightest self. And so it might be useful to just take a look at, okay, reasonably, how long do I have to do this? I did something like this in October 2019, where I felt like, okay, I'm hitting my wall. I don't know when I'm going to hit my wall, but like reasonably at some point next year, I want to start making a shift. And so I started to journal on the things that I was manifesting, things that I was calling in, and wrote down what I wanted to let go of. So the things that were on my schedule that I felt like they were draining me. And really everything that I dreamt of, that I had written down, that I thought, okay, if this happens in the next 5 years, that would be pretty astounding. And then really everything started taking form, within the first 4 months of the next year. And it's just the power of, there there's very rarely anything that we have to just grimace and brace ourselves for. More often than not, we're able to create change. It does take bravery because oftentimes we stay in circumstances that are not agreeable because we're scared of the change. Or if I let go of this, what if I don't have anything? But I would say, it would be really useful to sit down and journal what it is that you do want. It's usually easier to write down or to think about or to talk about the things that we don't want. That feels easier to access. I would really encourage writing down the things that you do want and then start orienting to create that in your life. And if you're not sure, that's what I'm here for. I'm always happy to be in conversation on things like this. I think it's so important that we have people that can help expand our awareness as to what is possible, because there's so much more available than oftentimes we can possibly conjure.
All right, Veronica. So, finally, if someone listening right now feels disconnected from themselves and doesn't know where to begin, what is the first step towards finding their way back?
Yeah, I mean that it really goes from what we were just talking about of getting really clear on what lights you up, what inspires you, what you desire. Because if we're feeling disconnected, it's usually because our attention is on something that feels depleting, that there's a misalignment of where our direction is currently placed. And so, a really great gateway to connection is to think about when you're 10 years old or when you were 10 years old, what were you doing that brought you joy? Was it art? Was it dance? Was it music? Was it going for a hike? Was it hanging out with your friends? So just free write on that. And then it doesn't have to be, that you're trying to recreate something when you were 10 years old. But usually in that journaling exercise, it does bring to mind that initial part of you that was connected to probably something creative, maybe something active. Maybe it was a sport that you played that you really love. And maybe if that sport doesn't speak to you anymore, maybe it's more just connecting to the energetics of something physical, something where you're creating, probably something where you're in community, where you're connected to people who feel like they're inspiring to you. So that would be a really great place to begin.
All right, thank you so much. So, for those who would like to connect with you, how can they do that?
Yes, I'd love to connect. You can learn more about me on my website, yogawithveronique.com. I'm on Instagram at Veronique Ory. I'd love to connect on yoga, of course, and really, as we've moved through this conversation, that you can really see the connection to the the connection to light, right? Or the connection to shine as it resonates for each person. And so if that feels elusive, or if anything, in this conversation intrigued you, definitely send me a message. I'd love to connect. If you're looking for community for practice, you can always check out my Shine membership. It's a global community where there's guided practices and ways to practice in community on my website, and would love to invite you in.
All right, thank you so much. And To my audience as well, thank you all for tuning in. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys on the next episode. Thank you, Veronique, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You as well.
Bye.